Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be back.
We've gotten a ton of requests from listeners about UFOs and aliens.
Yeah, seems like it's really captured the public imagination lately.
Definitely, and of course the big question is, what does the Bible have to say about all this?
Right, because we're always getting questions about how ancient texts and beliefs intersect with these modern mysteries.
Exactly. So we're going to dive into some fascinating biblical passages and explore different interpretations.
I think what's important to remember is that the Bible doesn't explicitly mention aliens in the way we understand them today.
Yeah, no spaceships or little green men.
But that doesn't mean there's nothing relevant to the topic.
Right,
Right.
just because something isn't stated outright doesn't mean there's nothing to learn.
Exactly. It's all about interpretation and how we connect the dots.
So let's start with one of the most well-known examples, Ezekiel's vision.
Yes, Ezekiel.
He describes these incredible beings, whirlwind fire wheels within wheels' eyes everywhere.
Some seriously wild imagery. It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
You can see why some people interpret it as a potential UFO sighting.
Right, but we also have to consider the context.
Exactly. Ezekiel was a prophet, communicating a spiritual message.
So maybe it's not about a literal spaceship, but a symbolic representation of God's power and presence.
That's a common interpretation among biblical scholars.
Okay, so not aliens, but still a pretty mind-blowing experience.
Definitely. And this idea of divine transportation through otherworldly vehicles appears elsewhere too.
Oh, like where?
Well, think about the story of Elijah ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right. There's definitely a connection there.
Both stories tap into this idea of divine power and movement beyond our human understanding.
It makes you wonder if those ancient descriptions influenced our modern ideas about extraterrestrial encounters.
That's a fascinating question. Are we seeing echoes of these ancient narratives in our contemporary fascination with UFOs?
It's like these stories speak to a deep-seated human longing to understand the mysteries of the universe.
This desire to connect with something beyond ourselves, something otherworldly.
And speaking of otherworldly, let's talk about angels.
Right. The Bible is full of stories about angels appearing to humans.
And those appearances are often pretty dramatic.
Some manifestations, unusual forms, even a bit of terror sometimes.
Yeah, like those angels who appeared to the shepherds in Luke's gospel.
Right. They were terrified. The angels had to tell them, don't be afraid.
I can imagine it would be pretty overwhelming to encounter a being like that.
Especially if you're just a shepherd minding your own business.
Makes you think how easily those encounters could be mistaken for something extraterrestrial.
Especially in our modern context, where we're primed to think about aliens.
How do we distinguish between angels who are described as spiritual beings and the idea of aliens as extraterrestrial life forms?
Well, angels are consistently described as messengers of God operating within a spiritual realm and fulfilling a divine purpose.
So their appearances might seem strange, but they're acting within a specific theological context.
Exactly, and that's where the distinction lies.
So even though both angels and aliens might seem otherworldly, we're talking about two different categories of being.
One spiritual, the other potentially physical.
Okay, that makes sense. But if God's creation is so vast as the Bible suggests, could there be room for both?
That's a question worth pondering. Does the vastness of creation exclude the possibility of other intelligent life forms existing alongside humanity?
Right, just because the Bible doesn't mention aliens directly doesn't mean they couldn't exist.
Especially when you consider passages like Psalm 19.1, the heavens declare the glory of God and the sky above proclaims his handiwork.
And Isaiah 40.26, lift up your eyes on high and see who created these. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing.
It's awe-inspiring when you think about the scale of it all.
It really makes you wonder what else might be out there in the vastness of space.
And that brings us to another passage that sparked a lot of debate, the story of the Nephilim in Genesis.
Yes, the Nephilim. They're described as the offspring of sons of God and daughters of men.
Now, who are these sons of God? That's where things get really interesting.
Some people say they were fallen angels. Others say descendants of Seth. And then there are those who go even further,
Suggesting maybe something extraterrestrial was going on.
It's a passage that's ripe for interpretation.
Each theory has its implications.
But the Bible itself seems more concerned with the moral and spiritual consequences of these unions rather than providing a detailed account of alien encounters.
That's a key point to remember. The focus is on the impact these events had on humanity's relationship with God.
So while the Nephilim might spark our curiosity about ancient mysteries and the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement,
The Bible's message seems to be more about the human drama unfolding within a spiritual context.
Okay, so we've talked about ancient texts and interpretations, but how should Christians approach the modern surge in UFO reports and government disclosures?
I mean, does seeing a strange light in the sky automatically equal aliens? I think the key takeaway here is discernment.
Discernment, that's what the source kept emphasizing too.
Just because something is unexplained doesn't mean it's extraterrestrial.
There could be natural explanations or maybe even human-made technology that we haven't fully grasped yet.
We need to be critical thinkers and evaluate the evidence carefully.
Absolutely. And as Christians, we can approach these mysteries with a sense of wonder and curiosity.
While also grounding our understanding in the truth of God's Word.
Okay, so discernment is key, but what if, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, what if some of these sightings do turn out to be genuine alien encounters?
How would that fit into our understanding of God's plan for humanity?
Would we need to rethink our place in the universe?
Well, that's a question that has puzzled theologians for centuries.
And one that we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. Welcome back, everyone.
You know, I'm still thinking about that last question before we,
About how alien encounters might fit into our understanding of God's plan.
Yeah, it really is a big one. And we've been talking about how the Bible doesn't rule out extraterrestrial life.
Right, and the vastness of creation.
But if God did create other intelligent beings, it raises so many questions.
Like, how does that impact our understanding of God's sovereignty?
Exactly. And you mentioned earlier that Colossians 1:1c says that all things were created by and for Christ.
All things, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him.
So if God created everything, then wouldn't that include any alien civilizations too?
It would seem so.
Yeah.
It suggests that even if there are other intelligent beings, they still fall under God's authority.
Wow, that's pretty mind-blowing. It reframes the whole UFO discussion.
It's not just about little green men visiting Earth.
It's about potentially encountering another part of God's creation.
It definitely adds another layer to the conversation.
And it makes me think about those who are unsettled by all the UFO talk.
If we believe in a God who is sovereign over everything, then even aliens wouldn't challenge that.
That's a good point. It's comforting to know that God is in control no matter what.
And our understanding of the universe is always evolving too. We're learning more all the time.
Which is exciting. And the source material we're looking at really emphasizes approaching all this with discernment.
Right, not jumping to conclusions.
Just because something is unexplained doesn't automatically mean it's aliens.
There could be natural explanations or even technologies we don't understand yet.
So we need to be critical thinkers.
Exactly.
But okay, let's say, just for argument's sake, that some of these sightings really are aliens.
Okay.
How would that change our understanding of God's plan for humanity?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, because the Bible doesn't give us a specific answer for how to interact with extraterrestrial life.
So are we kind of on our own here? Do we have to use our faith and reason to figure it out?
In a way, yes, but we can still rely on the principles of love, compassion, and respect for all of God's creation.
Even if those others happen to be aliens.
Exactly.
I like that. It's like the golden rule, but on a cosmic scale.
It's a principle that goes beyond our planet.
Okay, but here's another question. I bet a lot of people are wondering. If there are aliens out there, would they need salvation?
Would Jesus have died for their sins too?
It's a tough one.
It's a question theologians have debated for centuries.
Because on one hand, God's love extends to all creation.
Right, God's grace is universal.
But the Bible specifically focuses on God's plan for humanity through Jesus.
It's about the redemption of humankind.
So how do we reconcile those two ideas? How does alien salvation fit into our faith?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it leads us into some pretty deep theological waters.
Deep waters indeed. And maybe that's a good place to pause for a moment and reflect. We'll continue exploring these questions about alien salvation and God's plan in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back.
I don't know about you, but I'm still thinking about that alien salvation question.
It's definitely a mind bender.
Before the break, you said that the Bible doesn't really give us a straight answer on that.
Yeah, it's not something that's explicitly addressed.
Right, but if God's love is for everyone, couldn't it apply to aliens too?
That's a good question. And it's something theologians have wrestled with.
Yeah.
I mean, if God created other intelligent beings, wouldn't he want them to be saved too?
That makes sense. So maybe there are other ways to be saved that we don't know about.
It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
We have to remember that we're looking at this from a human perspective.
Right, we're limited.
We don't know everything about God's plan.
Our source kept saying how people throughout history have tried to understand the cosmos through their own beliefs.
It's true. We all have our own biases.
Like those ancient stargazers thinking the constellations were gods.
Or even today, with scientists looking for signs of alien life.
So how do we even begin to think about alien salvation without getting stuck in our own limited view?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Mhm.
I think we have to hold on to the core principles of our faith.
Like God's love and grace.
Exactly. But also recognize that those principles might look different in other parts of the universe.
It's humbling to think that we might not have all the answers.
But isn't that part of what makes faith so amazing?
Yeah, trusting in God, even when things are a mystery.
It reminds me of that verse from Deuteronomy. The secret things belong to the Lord our God.
It definitely feels relevant here, like some things are just beyond our understanding.
But that shouldn't stop us from exploring and asking questions.
That's been one of the biggest takeaways for me from this whole deep dive.
It's about always seeking truth.
And recognizing that the journey of faith is full of mystery and discovery.
Exactly. So keep looking up at the stars and keep asking those big questions.
And remember, even when we're faced with the unknown,
God is always with us.
thanks for joining us, everyone. That's it for this deep dive into the Bible and the search for extraterrestrial life. We'll see you next time.